Welcome to the Rethink Leadership Podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. My guest for today's Rethink Leadership podcast is Anita Ghosal. Born and raised in London, Anita's a second-generation UK-born Indian who turned her pain into power after experiencing an abusive childhood and her father taking his own life. She transitioned from the corporate world to become the pioneer of Liberate Me, sacred geometry soul design signature system, disrupting and shattering conventions of traditional leadership and self-help development. In fact, as a free gift for listeners, we have the gift of a sacred geometry signature and activation reading from Anita, which will be bespoke to each individual. The link is on the outro screen on YouTube and in the show notes on all other platforms. We discuss what this is all about, why it's important, and how to get involved. I even signed up at the end of the session myself. This episode is in aid of Papyrus UK that does amazing work in the field of suicide prevention. We've made a donation as a thank you to Anita for joining us. Hi, Anita. Thanks very much for joining me. Tell us about yourself, your career, and your passions.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, first off. So, where do I start? So, I'm Anita, UK-born Indian, raised in the UK, came over to Asia 12 years ago. Oh my God, I've had a lot of different passions, but I was in the corporate world for about 18 years in marketing. And then I moved out of that about 7 years ago. I think it was about 7 years ago. When I took all my experiences and invented, if you like, a different model for leadership, coaching, training, personal life things, called Sacred Geometry by Your Soul Design Signature, Liberate Me. So that's what I'm doing now. Did I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Tell us a little bit more about that sacred geometry before we get into it.
Yeah, so sacred geometry is just, most people know sacred geometry. If you Google it, you'll get, different shapes and geometric things and the pyramids and how that came about and how that's quite esoteric and we don't really know how it came about, but it's very mathematical. And it's a bit like that to our own being, our own individual signatures, like our own individual fingerprints, if you like, what holds us back, who we're here to be, how we're here to operate. It contains it all in there. And the life experiences we're having or the situations we're in kind of feed into that. And we're not utilizing it because we're not that aware of it. So it was just a nice term to put that together and to let us know that we've got individual signatures. We're really unique in how we come into who we're here to be and what we're here to enjoy and what we're here to do in leadership, in the leadership of our own lives and businesses or in your careers or whatever it may be. So it sort of came from there, that it's from the inside out, but using all of our circumstances that are moving around us. So that's where it was born.
Yeah, and of course there's so much more now around, you're right, leadership of self, leadership of life, leadership in your businesses. And the more senior we look up in the organizations, we're also seeing a lot more pressures and a lot more around mental health, wellness, as leaders become more open to the pressures they're under, the challenges that they're trying to deal with. What are you seeing out there in terms of the root causes and the impact that it's having on leaders and businesses?
Yeah, I think it's been long-standing mental health. It affected me early in my life with my father. So he was a leader of his own businesses. And unfortunately, he lost his life due to mental health problems and depression and things like that. So for me, it became a big deal and it almost put me off. It's like, I don't want to be a leader if this is what it brings, right? Because it comes with all these pressures and anxieties and everything else. So it's a really real thing. I think what's beautiful now, it's just more talked about, right? And we are talking about it. We are bringing it to the table, which is amazing. When I left the corporate world as a leader, I was part of the board of directors for Asia Pacific. And we would call it a toxic environment. I'm sure a lot of people might relate with that. It's like, it's toxic, this person's toxic, the way they're treating me, or there's bullying, or there's not respect, or whatever it may be. And then I just saw that, wow, this is a really common thing. And organizations do care about it. They're trying to do things at a HR level, put policies in, have well-being type policies and trainings or whatever it may be, coaching. So they do care about it, but it didn't seem to be fixing it, is what I've seen. So, and it still seems to be moving around in that way, despite a lot of effort now, really good intentions that I'm not sure was there before in my early days, but which is great. But what you talk about the root cause, I think you hit the nail on the head with that, because inside of this sacred geometry signature that I've talked about, that sounds a bit, out there, bless you. There's an element that's all about the root cause. It's called the root wound signature. We all have a root wound signature. It's really personal to us, our personal backgrounds, culture, the experience of your upbringing, your lineage, things you've gone through. And that doesn't really come onto the table inside of a leadership or a corporation or an organization, because they're like, well, your personal stuff is separate, right? This is obviously a company problem, but actually we're bringing all of our personal stuff. I won't say, I was going to swear then, but we're bringing all our personal stuff right into, and we're not, and everybody's doing that. And so often what you see in organizations, it operates like a dysfunctional family, or like a toxic family, if you want to call. I don't love that word, but a lot of people recognize it. And actually the opportunity, I won't say problem, is that it comes from the inside out. So using the things that are triggering you, or that feel toxic or dysfunctional, and taking them to your own root cause, your own root wound, and get insight to that. And then you're able to evolute that. And so often what's happening is that we're operating in another element of our signature, which is called your false trait signature. False, not you, not true, your inauthentic self, if you like, where we're just trying to do a cover up, because we haven't evoluted the pain, if you like, some of our root causes into who we're here to be. So then we have a lot of anxiety because we're pretending to be something, or the imposter, or the different things. But we look like we're doing pretty well on the surface, but it's not really authentic. So, and that causes a lot of a painful experience that doesn't have to happen. So, and we just don't have sight of it. We're just not aware. Either we're just not aware of it, that we have these root causes that are personal to each individual, or we don't know what it is exactly. So the nice thing with having your signature is that you get direct insight into it. You get to see it, it gets read for you. You're like, okay, now we can evolute this on an individual level. You can do it on a team level as well. But it's more personal than it's a company problem as such, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it's funny, the terminology is not so familiar to me, but I
Yeah.
really understand it, that root wound, that
Yeah.
the fact that we are a whole person made up of, could be our parents, our life, and then we step into the corporate walls, we're impacted by other people there. We might see the same traits that we see at home, if they're negative or positive, depending on what that is.
Yeah.
And in some companies, we're actually forced to conform, this forced trait, and wearing
Yeah.
a mask, I would call it sometimes,
Yes.
is you
Yeah,
do that
exactly.
inauthentic
Yeah.
self. And it's no wonder, is it, that it starts to impact mental health. And one of the symptoms of that is toxicity, it's dysfunctional relationships, because there's a lot more going on just than that relationship, clearly. One thing that strikes me though, Anita, is, and it's a question that popped into my head, which is this impacting male leaders differently to female leaders? And how different
Right. Well, that's an interesting one, because I think the common understanding generally is that women have a harder time in leadership than men. Having been a woman leader, having started my story telling you about my dad being a leader and what played out there, so he was definitely having a hard time. But I think overall, the understanding is that women are having a harder time. So a lot of attention has been given to women and policies or initiatives to help women, like, come into themselves, come into leadership, equal pay, diversity, equal opportunities, all of that. But actually what I found is that there's a bit of a misconception in it. And this is why we're finding the rise of male mental health challenges coming to the forefront more, and they're suffering anxiety and all the same things that women are suffering, because we are all the same. Inside of sacred geometry, we're all the same. We all have this root wound. We all have this false self. We all have an authentic self that we're here to be, and the human we are. And we all have that. So to me, it's a bit of a misconception. And that's why men's mental health is now on the rise, with a lot of anxiety, depression, all of the things. So I work with both men and women in leadership, and it's exactly the same. They're just not allowed to talk about it, and have put a lot of effort into helping women. And then it still doesn't seem to help the women. I've worked with like State Street Bank, AXA, Knight Frank, and gone into their organizations. And actually it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. What's really going on at a deeper root cause level. So it's a bit of a misconception, I think, that we've overlooked inside of what's going on, that it's more women and less for men, because men, they can get into leadership. But they're suffering all the same things: imposter syndrome, anxiety, fear, not really being who they are, operating in their full self, not being authentic, and then feeling like they need to cover it up even more in some way. So that it's like a pressure cooker.
So yeah, so just replaying that back, the core of the issue is the same for men and women, but women are able to talk about it, to deal with it, to share it a little bit more openly. And it's a modern phenomenon, let's say, that men are now much more open about this, and it's seemingly multiplying the problem, but the problem's always been there. Actually, we've just not talked about it. Is that right? Is that fair?
Yeah, that's spot on. Exactly right. That's exactly right. The
So
way that I'm seeing it.
Yeah, and you talked about their anxiety, imposter syndrome, and if I tag that onto the fact that many organizations have this always on business culture right now. We're in transformation. Speed is the competitive edge of today. We're finding ourselves in these environments. How is that accentuating the problem?
Yeah, so I mean, it feeds into everything we've been saying, I'd say. So the anxiety, the imposter syndrome, comes from those root causes, because really anxiety and imposters, they're feelings, right? they're undeveloped feelings, emotions, that come from a root wound or the root cause, or acting like something you're not from your full self, then feeling like I don't know who I am anymore. How did I get here? I should probably feel happy, like everything's going well on the surface. I've got this great experience, but I just feel like I want to get out of here. This is not my ladder. How did I get here? And then all kinds of different emotions come in. But they're emotions, right? All of those, if you think about your anxiety and just for a minute wrote down every thought and feeling that was coming up, they're feelings and thoughts that are undeveloped, and they just need your love and attention, if you like, to develop them and evolve them. And instead we're kind of labeling it like, oh, I've got an anxiety problem, maybe I'll medicate it, maybe I'll meditate out of it, which are short-term things, but really you can actually transcend it and evolve it to come into who you're here to be, your authentic self, and how you're here to operate. And then these things loosen, we have a different experience with it. And it's that anxiety and that imposter syndrome and all of that, not being who you're here to be and acting in your full self, but those masks, wearing all those masks and trying to pretend all of the time, that is causing that. And that keeps us always on, because we're faking it. It feels like we're faking it, right? I'm going to be found out at some point. I know I had this when I was a marketing director. I was like, oh, I'm going to be found out at some point, right? That I'm completely useless and I'm not good enough and I shouldn't be here. There's been some kind of mistake. Because we're not in our true skin at the moment. And that's what's trying to move. So we have to always be on, because we've always got to prove ourselves. And then we have a culture like that as well, that thinks we always have to be on. But there's so much power in slowing down to speed up. So much power in slowing down to speed up and transcending those root causes and coming out of the false selves and putting some attention onto that. And you see things start to move more naturally and organically, and you have more success. It's almost like it feels a bit magical, a bit more pre-provided, like we don't have to make it happen, really bang on it. So, because yeah, it's inhumane and there's a natural creation flow to life. The corporate world hasn't historically believed in, because it's not based on logic. It's like, okay, we're all just we're all in who we're here to be. We're in our authentic selves. We're feeling good. We're happy where we are. We feel loved. We feel respected. That's going to lead to good results. They're like, come on, that's not going to work. But it does. It does.
You have just described me down to a tip where I was when we were talking before we started recording here about time in Singapore. I mean, by the time I got to 2018, after 7 years there, I had to leave, and I had to
Yeah.
leave my job. Is like, because
Yeah.
it's self-protection. So, when you're talking about that feeling of drowning, needing to get out, always on, proving self, I'm going to get found out. I can't slow down. I've got to keep going. The word that you use, which I've not used, inhumane, I think it's there. And, the thought process, oh, the business is treating me as if I need to be really grateful of getting this opportunity, but they're not helping me through that opportunity. And actually, all of these, you're creating this sort of myths around it all, but it spins out, increases the anxiety, can't sleep, everything gets worse, and you're right. And being a man who I see myself as more open, still took me a long time to say help,
Yeah.
and to do it. So I kind of get that there. So I'm interested to know, because I know there are a lot of leaders that I meet now, and I can just tell that they're dealing with some of the same things. You've worked with the same kind of leaders. So how do you approach this with them? You talked about is slow down, speed up. How do you help them, first of all, pause, reflect, and then take those small steps forward so that they can start to feel happier and healthier in and out of work?
Yeah, I think the first step is to recognize that it's not working and there is another way. There is another way, but we don't have to come to a point where life literally shuts us down, because it's like, I'm not messing with you now. You have to deal with this root cause stuff and this anxiety, because there's real stuff there. But also to, create a bridge between your personal, it's kind of, we need to get out of robot mode and into human mode a little bit more, and not be so fearful of that, and know that your personal life and your personal backgrounds really are intrinsically linked to your professional life as a leader, and it is for your employees or your fellow leaders or whatever their positions are, and that we've all got a leader within. Everybody's a leader, really. It doesn't matter if you're in a leadership position. Okay, it's kind of like, it's okay that we can bring the personal stuff in. We can bring that in, and we can bring that to the table as well. Okay, whether you do that personally, one-to-one with somebody, and look at your signature and what's going on there, or you invest in your employees or your other leaders and say, look, you can go this one-to-one, and this is like not your average on the surface self-help or self-development, but you can go deeper, and it's going to affect your whole life, because it's actually we're separating things. And it's like, if you're having a terrible time in your marriage, or you had a really hard upbringing, you're going to get triggered by things and misunderstand things that happen in the workplace and feel like you're being put upon or whatever it is. But once we can take personal responsibility, rather than kind of, once we can say, I want to help myself. Can you help me to help myself? Like, getting to that point that you are at, like, help. Right? I am willing to help myself. Who and what can help me? Like, and just taking that step back, allowing someone to slow down, because then once it starts moving, you kind of have these quantum results, quantum movement. But it just slows down for a while. It looks like nothing is happening, but a lot is happening, because a lot is growing and there's an evolution happening, and then you get these bigger results that you couldn't have predicted. So yeah, it's bringing the personal in, I would say, and making that okay. Just making it more humane. Let's get out of robot mode.
Do you have any, without naming names, but do you have any examples of people you've worked with that have kind of gone through that journey, and where they've, what steps they've taken kind of past that?
I mean, where I've personally worked with people, so I went into an organization and I did a workshop. I think we called it Release the Leader Within, Unleash the Leader Within, something like that. But using sacred geometry by your soul design. So a complete different approach where we go deeper, and you wouldn't usually bring that into a corporate organization. I know I've never seen it. And I told my personal story. So you have to get vulnerable to have other people be vulnerable, first off. And then start to open up ways that they can open up and make it a safe space. And there were men and women leaders there. We had literal tears from people that were against each other, toxic relationships, and them seeing, oh my God, this is who you are. This is what you're going through in your life. This is your background. And the humanity came in. And that changed so much. And then they worked on themselves individually in their individual signatures, and they could communicate much better. They were getting the promotions they wanted, the respect they wanted, and just operating with more humanity, a bit like what you talk about, distributed leadership, more as equals. Not you're better than me, and it's a fight, it's a dog fight. So, because they start to see these are humans. They're going through stuff. They got vulnerabilities. So yeah, examples like that. I know it's a bit generic, but hopefully it gives a bit of an idea.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's perfectly understandable, and it just goes back to what you said before that, which is that you're getting out of robot mode, or how you think you should be perceived mode,
Yeah.
into the human
Just
mode,
get
right?
real, get real, get
Yeah,
real.
get
Okay,
real.
we
And
talk about authentic, but I remember when I left, my very similar to you, was just like done, over. And then I left my job and I was like, I'm never going to go back to the corporate world, never going to do that, because they were the problem. And my friend said to me, are you, the way you act with us, when you're out with us and we're at dinner and all the stuff that you've been going, do you act like that at work? I was like, God, no. No, not at all. Listen, that's the problem. And that's what sort of ignited something in me. I was like, oh yeah. Right. Because obviously it's not easy to do that because the space is set up in this robotic way, and we're not supposed to bring the personal, keep your personal separate. This is professional. But actually it's all linked. So if we can find a way to bring that together, because that's the truth of it, that's what's affecting everything. Not just what's happening at work or what your boss is doing or what your colleague is doing or what policy is in place. There's so much more that's feeding into that. In that sacred geometry and all the things that are happening around you and then around this person. And, when we're all carrying that stuff and we're just bringing it into a room, and it can get pretty hairy, and we can have a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of dysfunction. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
you can. And I know that
real.
we've talked before about this, both of our experiences. And as soon as you can make it personal, and as soon as you start finding yourself again, and bringing
Yeah.
that person that's outside of work to work, actually,
Yeah.
and what you see is what you get. I just love showing up as myself these days.
Yeah. And it's
And
crazy. The more you show up as
yeah,
yourself, I'm vulnerable and messy and messing, actually, the more success you have.
it it
It's kind of
people
crazy.
appeal to that humanity, though. I think that's what you said. And
Yeah.
the way I looked about it, and when you said make it personal, I wrote something down that I said, because I said this to a couple of leaders I've talked to, is like, treat yourself like you treat a client. You're the client, you're
Yeah.
your own client. So what are you going to do to
Yeah.
solve this, and get that sort of mindset round? And I'm sure out there, Anita, there are organizations, there are people that particularly organizations who are probably more enlightened in this way, in how they
Mm.
support their leaders, particularly because I'm calling for that as well, is that we need to support our leaders more. Can you give us any examples of organizations doing it well, and how they're doing it?
Yeah. I mean, I think many organizations are doing their best, right? At the moment. I think the ones that are really out there and doing it, the disruptive, the new age type, the unicorn type organizations, the tech and all of that stuff. They're really looking to bring this stuff in, but I would still say it's not completely personalized. I would still say it's really good intentioned. But I think everyone's still struggling because they have all the answers and a lot of them bringing different initiatives in, or different well-being, different leadership initiatives in. And it's not working. Like when I was State Street Bank was one that I worked with, and they were like, why isn't this working? Like they got the fearless girl, right? This is statue they have around supporting women in leadership, and they're bringing all these policies, we're doing all these things, and it doesn't work. They're still at each other's throats. They are still dysfunctional. They still don't trust each other. And I said, because that's not the issue. It's from the inside out. There's something personal with each of these people, their backgrounds, their root causes that needs to be looked at and transcended so they can and understand others, so we can get more human and get more real around that. So I think there's a lot of effort and it's moving in the right direction. There's not one particular organization I know that will go, you've got it. You got the perfect model there. I haven't seen it myself. You might have seen it. I don't know. But yeah. Great effort, though.
I've not seen it, but it's more what I'm seeing are people like you going in, helping that movement from awareness to acknowledgement around this.
Yes.
And bringing that inside out conversation to the fore.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm sure this will resonate for many of those leaders tuning in here. So here's the $64,000 question for you, is that what would be if you were to kind of single out 3 top tips for leaders who are resonating with this to make a little bit of progress and build some positive momentum, what would they be?
I mean, it is be you, activate you, right? Be you, all of you. Show all of your vulnerability, all of your truth, all of your life, all of your F-ups, everything, bring it to the table. And if you find that difficult and you're wearing a lot of masks and you feel that's not possible, or it's dangerous in some way, or you can't do that, that's not appropriate, then look at what I call your sacred geometry signature, which has 4 elements in it, and dive into that on a personal level between you and you. And it will improve your life, but also your professional life. So you can be, we all talk about being authentic, but no one's really being authentic. So it's like, this is me being authentic. It's like, well, it's not really, right? So you got to bring it all to the table. It's easy to say, be you, be yourself. But actually, the transcendence and the activation it takes to do that, if you don't know what's at your root cause that's stopping you, that's causing that anxiety, is pretty impossible without taking a look at that and transcending that and letting it evolve. And then you can be you. It happens very naturally. Then you come into who you're to be. And like you've said, since you've moved away and you've become more of who you are and to show up as you, it appeals more. It gets you more connection, more success, more everybody wins. But it's really scary because it falls into vulnerability, right? So be you, be vulnerable. If you don't know how, go and have a look at those root causes and start to activate that. It's just not from the outside in.
Yes, yeah, right. From the inside out, you first understand that root cause, face those fears of being vulnerable or showing courage, but just do it anyway, and be aware of how people are reacting and how much more positive it is. And I think you can take those small wins, can't you?
Yeah, and if you're having a negative experience, another tip is, it's happening for you and not to you. So where you're having a negative experience, it's dysfunctional, it's toxic, or whatever it is, you feel like someone's doing that to you, or the circumstances doing that to you, it's kind of nature's way of trying to tell you, you can't see this, but there's something in a root cause that you need to take a look at personally to transcend that, see that, evolve that, grow that. And then this happens naturally. then you come into who you're here to be and how you're here to operate and have an easier time of being you and being vulnerable. It doesn't feel as scary, or I can't do that. What would people think of me? All of those kinds of things. So it's always happening for you, not to you. Take personal responsibility.
Yeah. That authentic self, and making that decision. I mean, that's part of the thing, isn't it? Is that decision to actually do it is that first step. Now, you've mentioned we're sadly at the end of this conversation, Anita, and you've mentioned a few times the sacred geometry and how this relates. I'm sure many of those listening will want to connect with you, find out more about that. How do they do that? How do they get in touch?
So the easiest way to get in touch, you can go via the website, liberatemetm.com. And there's a link there where you can actually WhatsApp direct to get your individual bespoke sacred geometry signature. I will give you a reading. I'll read your signature. You receive that reading. You get a massive insight into yourself, what's moving, why it's happening, how to activate it into what you desire, or even better. And come into more of who you're here to be, what you're here to enjoy, and what you're here to have. So the easiest way is probably for the website. I'm on Instagram, obviously, as well. Liberate Me on YouTube, all the usual places. You can find me if you want that. It's a different way. It's a different way of tackling things, and a pretty fun, wild ride. So we get off the surface and you get immediate insights.
Well, that is one of my first actions following this. I'm going to go to that website and I'm going to get onto that WhatsApp, and I'd love a reading. So I'll be in touch. Absolutely, I would be in touch. So Anita, thanks so much for joining me. What a great conversation to bring this out into the open. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the space.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership Podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. Please like, comment and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.